Koichi Shikishima is a man struggling against the weight of his sins. A proud kamikaze warrior abandoning his mission? Cowardice. That same warrior failing to help his fellow soldiers when Godzilla attacked the island base he ran away to? Cowardice and ineptitude. That same warrior, upon returning home to a ruined neighborhood, being held responsible for the deaths of his parents and numerous innocent lives by failing to do his national duty as a kamikaze? Koichi might as well be one of the worst sinners in existence. At least, that's certainly how he feels about it. He is resentful, remorseful, and bitter, but at least he hasn't lost his humanity. In the ruins of Tokyo, with everyone he knew either cursing his name or dead, Koichi finds himself living with and helping to provide for a household with Noriko and baby Akiko, none of whom are related to each other or even knew each other beforehand. They came together in the ruins of a broken nation. Slowly but surely, a semblance of peace and normalcy begins to return to the neighborhood. As tensions ease, neighbors help neighbors despite animosity of the past, and infrastructure is rebuilt. Koichi gets a job helping to disarm underwater mines left behind by the war, and begins to form bonds with the other men on this small boat. However, as often happens, the past begins to rear its ugly head. He failed to kill the monster once, and he fails to kill it again, as the ghosts of the soldiers he failed on that island continue to haunt his mind. And when he asks his dead parents if he can finally move on and begin to live life again, he is punished for it. The monster of the past ripping Noriko out of his life in the most visceral way possible. With the Japanese government being ineffectual, caught in a game of politics between the United States and Russia, former military personnel must band together in order to face the monster themselves. And Koichi sees this as an opportunity to make up for the sins of the past, to seek retribution and find redemption. At least, that's one way you could look at this movie. A truncated reading for sure, and not completely inaccurate. But Godzilla Minus One isn't a movie about redemption or retribution. This is a movie full of pain. Everyone throughout this narrative has some burden they're carrying, some loss they're suffering, some ideal they feel has been betrayed. It's understandable. World War II just ended, leaving devastation, loss, and suffering in its wake. It is one of the most human things one can do to suffer loss and pain, yet seek to overcome it and live on the other side of it. But still, this is not a movie about pain. This is a movie about human connection. How do humans connect despite the pain they suffer? Despite the hurt they feel? There's a scene during the meeting of former military personnel where, after hearing the plan, one former soldier says he has a family at home, that he risked his life once during the war and he can't afford to do so again. The former captain, Hota, could have bloviated about duty, honor, national pride, or any other aggrandized concept. But he didn't. Hota tells the soldier that he's free to go. He doesn't have the right to ask him to make that sacrifice. He tells everyone that they are free to leave, that this operation is voluntary, and that they won't be thought of as lesser if they can't make this sacrifice. This is profound for two reasons. First, around this time in history, the Japanese military has been mostly disbanded. The Imperial Army has been all but defanged and declawed, and thus Captain Hota is speaking to these soldiers basically on equal footing. Second, and in light of the previous point, Hota is being honest about the pain they have all endured. No shield of propaganda, no calls towards nationalism or idealism. Just an honest and open admission of pain. And that is what this movie is truly about at its deepest and most sincere level. Godzilla Minus One is a movie about being honest about pain. When Shiro Mizushima, a young man on the crew of the bomb disposal boat, opines that he could have learned to be a pilot and gunner like Koichi if only the war had lasted a little longer, Koichi is furious with him, with his crewmates understanding his anger, not because Shiro is having dreams of stolen valor, but rather because of their honesty over the horrors and pain that the war left behind. When Seiji Akitsu, the captain of the small bomb disposal boat, finds out the government is secretly using them against Godzilla to stall for time until a warship arrives, he bitterly expresses disdain for the way the government treats them, his words laced with the pain of recent wartime history. As the narrative unfolds, each of these characters, still reeling from loss and pain, learn over time that the only way to find peace and healing is to confront that very pain. Even Koichi must eventually do this. Even up until near the end of the story, Koichi still refuses to honestly accept and confront his pain, intoning at several points that his war is not over. His plan, if the plan that Captain Hotta, Kenji Noda, a former naval weapons engineer, and the other volunteers have devised, fails, is to fulfill the duty he failed to do during the war, to sacrifice himself to defeat Godzilla. However, the only fighter plane they can acquire is in a state of disrepair, and so Koichi reaches out to the one man he knows who can definitely fix it. The only other survivor of the island base which Godzilla attacked in the beginning, Sasaku Tachibana. Tachibana despises Koichi. He sees Koichi as being responsible for the deaths of his fellow soldiers, being too frozen by fear to shoot at Godzilla when he had the opportunity, on top of abandoning his duty as a kamikaze. So, after Koichi taunts Tachibana into finding him, and he beats Koichi severely, Koichi pleads with him to help him finally fulfill his mission. The war isn't over for either of these soldiers. Tachibana didn't want to be found after the war, and was hiding from his pain, while Koichi was refusing to move forward with his life, refusing to acknowledge himself as Akiko's father, and refusing to marry Noriko, until it was too late. This movie could have ended differently. It could have ended with Tachibana filled with hatred for Koichi, only helping him repair the fighter plane so he could watch Koichi finally die with honor in a kamikaze attack on Godzilla. But that would undermine what this movie is about. That would not allow either Koichi or Tachibana to honestly acknowledge their pain, to heal from it, and move forward. Let's take a moment away from movie analysis and talk about something more personal. This year has taught me more about pain than any other time in my life. I've been experiencing some health issues over the last year and a half, but since January, it's bloomed even more, and while it's not life-threatening and is at least partially treatable, it is still a semi-chronic, at times, debilitating illness. Add to that an anxiety disorder, a few other complications, and flare-ups of the illness, times when things get really bad, and this year has been difficult at times, to say the very least. But no, even that isn't me being honest about my pain. For most of the beginning of this year up until around April, and in smaller pockets since then, my life has been absolute hell. CT scans and blood work coming back mostly normal is a relief, but without conclusive answers it can also feel debilitating. I mean, I feel sometimes like I'm gonna die, yet there's very little wrong with me. What kind of bullshit is that? But all this both gave me the time and the impetus to look inward, to take a really deep look at myself, at how I was coping with all this, handling this pain, and whether I was truly willing to work through this pain. When Koichi asked his dead parents if he could begin to live life again, he wasn't being honest about his pain. When I questioned why I have to suffer with an illness that only becomes barely tolerable with medication, I wasn't being honest about my pain either. In both cases, we were afraid to take that deeper look, not at the pain itself, or what it means, Because in actuality, pain divorced from self-awareness is meaningless. Pain only truly has value with the context of what it takes from us, what is robbed and plundered, and what is left in its wake. Because in the end, what's left is still just us. It's just Koichi. It's just me. And that's terrifying. This script should have been finished weeks ago, and in fact, this part of the script, starting from just after I spoke about my semi-chronic illness, I only wrote from there until the end of the script a few days before this video will be uploaded. This video took me an extra 3 weeks to finish because of a bad flare-up and some additional health complications. Am I glad for this extra kick in the teeth life sent my way? Of course not. Pain isn't something to be grateful for. It simply is. It is a thing that exists, a thing that defines us solely by how we define it. So no, I'm not grateful that this video took an extra 3 weeks to complete. But in those 3 weeks, I've come to learn a lot more about my pain and the boundary between my pain and myself. And that is something I'm grateful for. My pain doesn't define me. Rather, I define it, and in so doing, I come to further understand who I am despite the pain. I didn't like some of what I came to understand about myself, but that's a part of being honest. That is a necessary step in growth. Growth is painful. Being honest also means admitting that none can face their pain completely alone. You need to have people who are willing to acknowledge and embrace your pain, even as they might not fully understand it. With that, both my brother, who is probably watching this, and my best friend, who is probably not, I have to thank you for helping me understand my pain and be honest with it. In a similar way, Koichi begins to honestly face his pain when he volunteers for the mission to stop Godzilla, but only partially, and that is where Tachibana, surprisingly, comes in. You see, freshly fueled by the loss of Noriko, and gaining the conviction he needed from the memory of the soldiers he failed on the island, he attempted to face his pain, but was doing it in the wrong way. His goal was to escape from his pain in death, and so he and Tachibana worked to turn the fighter into a kamikaze vehicle. Now I'm not going to go over the entire third act of the movie. If you haven't seen it, you should go ahead and do so. It is honestly one of the greatest Godzilla films ever produced. I will, however, spoil a key detail about Tachibana. So, spoilers ahead. Koichi's conviction and resolve, him admitting his faults and seeking redemption, him honestly acknowledging both his and Tachibana's pain, those are the things that convinced Tachibana to help. But something more important was also happening. The thing about being honest about pain, admitting and sharing pain, is that in doing so, we naturally tend towards understanding, growth, and most importantly, healing from pain. And so, as Tachibana is explaining to Koichi how to operate the fighter plane and what to do when he finally commits to the kamikaze run, he does something remarkable. He points out to Koichi that he personally installed an ejection lever so Koichi could escape death and parachute away. And then Tachibana looks Koichi in the eyes and tells him to live. Because that is the only way we can overcome pain, by choosing to live. And while overcoming pain, we sometimes learn that the things we thought it robbed us of are still there. Koichi learns that Noriko, though injured in the Godzilla attack on Ginza, survived. By being honest about our pain and through it learning more about ourselves, we sometimes regain a few things we thought we lost. Sometimes we come to understand and appreciate even more than we did before. Am I fully recovered? No. I don't know if or when I will fully recover. But here I am. All I can do is be honest, so I can learn, grow, and heal. All I can do, all you can do, is choose to live. We've reached the end, and I'm not going to ask you to do all the usual things, though you can if you want, and there's links in the description. All I'm going to ask you to do is to live, and learn and grow despite the pain of life, and to be more honest with yourself about your pain and how you define both it and yourself despite its existence. I'll see you next time.